I never thought that a sleepover would result in the most sensual and thrilling experiences of my life, but it is all because to my nephew. After a hard workday, everything began. A day that leaves every thought feeling exhausted, every muscle aching, and your body feeling heavy. I was too exhausted to even consider eating when I arrived home late. I just wanted to get into bed and let the world melt away for a few hours, and the last thing I wanted was dinner. Except for the faint glimmer of the hallway light peeking through my bedroom door, the home was dark and quiet. All I could do was gather the strength to dress comfortably before crawling beneath the covers. I closed my eyes and sighed deeply as the bed embraced me. Sleep came swiftly, drawing me into that dreamless emptiness where time became nothing. Hours must have gone by when I sensed a little shift in the atmosphere. I was partially awakened by something pulling at the border of my consciousness. In my dream, I noticed a shadow of a movement so slight that I was unable to completely comprehend what was occurring, a hazy presence in the room. I was half asleep when I heard the door creak softly open as I drifted in that realm between reality and dream, but then something occurred. A little pressure as someone sat down, a subtle touch on my arm, a warm, soft whisper on my skin, so soft that I wasn't even sure it was real, and the shift of weight on the bed next to me. As the warmth expanded throughout my body, my thoughts was racing with bewilderment, half dream, half awareness. I had no idea why, but my heart was pounding. There was only a strong feeling that something unsaid existed between us. There was neither terror nor dread. I felt a strong, firm hand, but I didn't move because I didn't want to ruin the moment, or perhaps because I didn't want to believe that this wasn't a dream. I felt a shock as he touched my shoulder softly, but my breath stuck in my throat as I struggled to comprehend what was occurring. Was this a figment of my tired imagination, or was it real? I opened my eyes slowly and squinted at the faint light that was coming in. My nephew was eating while seated on the bed beside me. He gazed at me and was silent, his face inscrutable. My breath froze in my throat as his hand remained on my shoulder. My voice could hardly be heard above the haze of sleep as I murmured, "What are you doing?" Davin remained still and did not retreat. His focused look and half-darkened face gave me a glimpse of something that made my stomach turn in a manner I couldn't quite put my finger on. He replied, "I didn't want to wake you," in a steady, low voice. "I just couldn't sleep." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. There was something in his eyes, and it was hard to think properly because of the quiet tension in the room. We had always been close, but this time was different. He had been staying with me for a few weeks, helping with the cleaning. There was something unsaid, something simmering just beneath the surface, between us, but it was impossible to ignore the way he looked at me and the way his body was drawn towards mine. His hand slipped from my shoulder but didn't move very far. "But I don't know, I just had to be here with you." The words hung heavy in the air between us, and I felt my heart beat faster. I moved a little beneath the blanket as the cloth rustled. Davin's eyes followed my every motion as I leaned against the headboard, his stare lingering. We sat in the room's quiet for a while, the weight of unsaid words pressing down on us. "I don't mind," I murmured quietly, breaking the stillness at last. Davin grinned, but his gaze didn't fully meet mine. There was something more profound, something I hadn't noticed before. "If you need to talk, it's no problem." His forehead was wrinkled in contemplation as he gazed at his hands fiddling with the blanket's edge. He said, "I don't know what's happening to me," following a protracted silence. I was unsure of his meaning or the direction of our conversation, but I could sense the weight of his eyes on me and the unsaid feelings that lingered between us. "I feel things I don't understand, and I don't know who else to talk to." He nodded, his hands still fiddling with the blanket, and I said, hesitantly, "Davin, you know you can talk to me about anything." I gulped hard, my mind rushing to make sense of the situation. "I know that's why I came here, but I don't know how to say what I need to say." His eyes had a certain quality that caused my chest to constrict. I wanted to know what he was thinking about. "I know that's why you came here," and he nodded his head while his hands were still playing with the blanket. "I don't know how to say what I need to say," so I swallowed hard. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened, but there was something in his eyes and something in the softness of his voice that made my chest tighten, and I wanted to know what was on his mind. A part of me was scared of the response, but I wanted to make him tell me how he felt. Davin gave me a quick glance before looking into my eyes to find a way to reassure me. He continued, "A kind of understanding about you," in a voice barely audible above a whisper. For an instant, I was unable to breathe, and my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. His words were impossible to mistake, and the intensity of his look was impossible to misread. This was more than a casual talk. I wasn't sure whether I was prepared to deal with this because it was something deeper. I muttered, "I don't know what that means," but my tone revealed the uncertainty and terror that were roiling inside of me. "It means I don't want this," Davin murmured, his voice firm but full of passion as he moved closer and brushed his fingers across mine, giving me a shock. Davin's comments were followed by a thick, heavy stillness that filled the space between us. I don't want to pretend I don't feel it, as if neither of us do. As I struggled to understand what he had said, I could hear my own heartbeat and felt the strain in my chest rise. I wasn't sure whether I was prepared to deal with this because it was something deeper. I muttered, "I don't know what that means," but my tone revealed the uncertainty and terror that were roiling inside of me. "It means I don't want this anymore." "I don't want to pretend," Davin replied, his voice steady but full of passion as he moved forward and touched me with his hand, sending a shockwave through me. However, Davin's statement was followed by a pause. "I don't want to act like we don't feel anything, like neither of us feels anything." It filled the space between us and seemed to go on forever, thick and heavy. As I struggled to understand what he had said, I could hear my own heartbeat and felt the strain in my chest rise. My nephew was sitting here talking things I wasn't sure I was prepared to hear, even though I had known him since I was a little child. My hand still rested softly on Davin's. My mind was racing with bewilderment and want, and it was difficult to think straight as the warmth crept across my skin. His words were like a heavy blanket pressing down on me. There was a part of me that I couldn't ignore, but I also wanted to draw away, to get away from whatever this was. I shook as I started, "Davin, this is a complicated situation." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, and I wasn't sure how to react to the pull I felt towards him. "I know," he muttered. His voice was calm, but it didn't make it any less genuine, given the tension in the room. I made an effort to ignore it and pretend it was only in my imagination. But I was no longer able to. My throat was dry as I swallowed hard, searching for the appropriate words. I never thought I would be in this perilous area, yet here we were, sitting in the dark for an unknown amount of time, with feelings simmering beneath the surface. With my thoughts racing, I said, "Should we? Therefore, this is not a possibility." Davin's hand got stuck in mine a little. He had a powerful but tender grasp. "Why not?" he said in a voice barely audible above a whisper. "Why didn't we?" I was genuinely unable to respond. This was incorrect for millions of reasons. However, given the connection I felt between us, none of them appeared to be strong. We were a family, therefore I wanted to explain that it was because he was my nephew. However, the intensity in his gaze and the way he looked at me changed everything. I inhaled deeply and made an effort to control my shaking voice. He nodded once more, his face softening a little. "We can't ignore that Davin is my nephew, it's not that simple." My pulse pounded, and as his words took hold, I sensed a comforting familiarity rising within of me. I know it's not simple, but that doesn't change how I feel. It was hard to dispute the veracity of his statements due to the calm resolve in his voice and the manner he talked. "There's something strange between us," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't want to ruin our relationship." "You won't ruin it." Davin quickly brought his hand to the side of my face, his thumb lightly touching my cheek. His touch was soft but sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't want to ruin anything either. I just want to be honest with you. I want to stop pretending for a moment." I closed my eyes, I tried to steady my breath, I tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. This was my nephew, but right now it didn't feel like family, it felt like something deeper, and the weight of realizing that when I opened my eyes again, Davin was still watching me, his expression open and vulnerable. It was his vulnerability that did this, the way he laid everything bare. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't retreating, he was giving me a choice, allowing me to decide what would happen next, and I didn't want to walk away without thinking. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. My heart pounding in my chest, my lips softly and vaguely brushed against his, and for a moment, everything else faded away, the world outside the room disappeared, and in the silence, it was just the two of us. Davin answered right away, moving his hand from my face to the nape of my neck and drawing me in. Slowly and methodically, the kiss intensified, and I felt a surge of warmth as our bodies rubbed against one another. We unexpectedly withdrew from one another, our foreheads pressing against one another as we struggled to collect our breath. The weight of what had just transpired was causing my heart to race and my head to spin. All I felt was a strange sensation of relief, as if we had finally let go of something that had been growing between us for a long time. I should have felt terrible and ashamed. Davin said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've wanted this for a long time." I was at a loss for words. I felt a surge of emotion as his words struck me like a freight train. He had been hanging on to this for longer than I had expected, and now that it was in the open, there was no going back. For him, this was more than just a moment or a passing notion. I said in a tremulous voice, "I don't know what this means. I have no idea where this is headed." My voice trembled a little as I murmured, "I don't know what this means. I don't know where this is going." He murmured softly, "We don't have to solve everything right now, we can take it slow, we don't have to rush anything," while keeping his thumb on my neck and slowly massaging my skin. His words created an unanticipated sensation of serenity. There was no pressure or urgency, just a silent understanding. One step at a time, we would work this out together. I nodded, trying to take in all that had just transpired while my heart continued to race. Both of us had never experienced this before, and despite the complexity, it seemed right rather than wrong. Davin's hand slipped from my neck, but he didn't move too far. He remained close, his presence steady and warm, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me that I hadn't felt in years. Finally, the silence lasted into the early morning hours, and we knew we had to figure out what would happen next, but for the time being, it didn't matter. What mattered was that we had stopped hiding and pretending, and that we would face whatever came next together. However, the story didn't end here. Soft shadows were created by the early light that came through the drapes. Because I had little slept and my mind was reliving everything that had happened and everything that had been said, the weight of the previous night lingered in the air, still a jumble of feelings I hadn't fully digested. The tension persisted even after Davin withdrew to his own room, leaving me to think alone. I pondered what the day would hold as I laid in bed and looked at SE. Was it possible for us to pretend that nothing had changed? Was it possible for things to return to their previous state? I had my doubts. No one had done anything, but everything changed the instant I kissed him. My pulse raced at the prospect of confronting him this morning. I wondered what he might say or do, and whether he would regret it. I eventually got out of bed, put on a shirt, and walked downstairs since I couldn't stay in bed forever. The home was silent, and I briefly believed Davin had already departed. Perhaps he had gone to get some fresh air or some alone time, but as I came around the corner into the kitchen, he was seated at the table, sipping a cup of coffee and staring out the window. I had to tell myself to breathe because seeing him made my stomach turn. He looked up as soon as he heard me enter, and we both remained silent for a while. Unspoken words became thicker in the hush. Davin's gentle voice pierced the quiet in the morning. Even though he spoke in a calm tone, there was something more in it that mirrored the strained energy I had sensed in the morning. I gave him a quite stern response. I was unsure of how to behave at this point. Would we discuss it or appear as like nothing had happened? The uncertainty was weighing heavy on me, and I wasn't sure how to handle this new situation between us. Even though it seemed a little forced, I made a small gesture and thought he could use the coffee pot on the counter when Davin gestured to it. I grinned and said, "Thank you." Although we both knew it wasn't, I could tell that Davin was attempting to lighten the mood by making this morning feel as normal as possible. I filled a cup for myself and sat down at the table across from him. Davin sipped silently for a few minutes before clearing his throat. My heart almost sprang out of my chest at what he had said last night, and I gulped hard, preparing myself for what was about to happen. He put down the cup with a gentle clink. "I'm not sorry, but I also don't want you to think I have any expectations," he said, looking into my eyes. "I don't want you to feel weird about it." Between us, whatever you know you're not prepared for lingered in the air, and I experienced a sense of comfort. I had no idea what to anticipate, yet his candor helped to ease the situation. I wasn't being pushed by him. I wasn't being asked to do anything. I had his space. Davin nodded, his face showing understanding. I'm trying to figure this out at my own pace, not regretting it, I said, raising my voice just above a whisper but still attempting to comprehend. I inhaled deeply as my fingers curled around the glass in front of me, realizing that this was something new for both of us. Reiterating the ideas that had been racing through my head all night, I replied, I know what this means, but I don't want to lose you, Davin. I don't want this to ruin our relationship. His fingers brushed mine as he moved forward and rested his hand softly on the table. His comments provided an unexpected sense of serenity. It won't happen, he replied firmly, we'll figure it out together, no matter what. Although it wasn't an easy scenario, it didn't have to be as difficult as I had mentally pictured. We were free to take our time and figure things out without feeling compelled to do anything. The hand of Davin. I briefly considered reaching out and bringing us closer together, just as I did last night, but I refrained since I wasn't sure whether it was the perfect moment. Rather, I gave him a kind grin, appreciating his tolerance and understanding. Does this mean I can take you out on a date? Davin said after a while, reclining back in his chair and smiling slightly. I blinked in surprise at the abrupt shift in tone, but then I couldn't help but chuckle since it was exactly what I needed, something light and calming. The weight on my chest began to lessen as Davin's smile grew. His smile remained intact as he arched an eyebrow, saying, You can't be serious. Why not? He said. People do this, they go on dates to get to know each other, and we see what happens. Still grinning, I shook my head, but the concept didn't seem as absurd as I had assumed. Perhaps it was best for us to take things slowly, as we would in a typical relationship, if we were to find out what it was between us. All right, I murmured, my heart thumping calmly at last. We should go on a date. Davin's eyes glowed, and seeing him made me feel warm. Thrills? Really? Indeed, it is. I replied, growing more confident by the second. Let's take our time and solve this problem. At last, Davin's palm covered mine as he laid across the table, holding onto it softly but firmly. He remarked, I've been looking forward to this, in a quiet but profound voice. My chest constricted. It seemed good to look at him, even though I knew this was the start of something none of us had anticipated. We only needed to be here together and take one step at a time. We didn't need to rush or have all the answers, but as the days passed, our bond got deeper. We began to settle into a relaxed rhythm and felt more at ease and natural. Something calmer, more personal, had taken the place of the intense tension that had previously been between us. We spoke, laughed, ate together, and occasionally there was a tender touch as Davin and I spent more time together. There was no rush, no need to rush into something we weren't prepared for, and in that void, the thing that was slowly growing emerged. We didn't force it, instead, we kept things slow and let moments unfold naturally without pushing anything. A brush of hands at a glance sent an electric shock through me. Davin reached out and wrapped his fingers around my hand one evening as we sat on the porch and the sun was setting, illuminating everything with a beautiful golden glow. As I gazed at him, the silent intensity of the moment caused my heart to soar. My voice barely above a whisper, I said, We're doing this, aren't we? Davin grinned, a deeper smile than words could convey shining in his eyes. He said, Yes, we are, and for the first time, I felt certain that we would deal with whatever it was together, no matter what happened. As the days stretched into weeks, Davin and I settled into a new routine. I felt a level of comfort I hadn't known I needed because there was no pressure or hurry to define what existed between us. Once wholly family, our connection has evolved into something more profound. We were just together, unwinding as we went, and we both accepted it without pushing it. However, this is not where the narrative ends. Davin did things in a certain manner. According to him, our dates consisted of easy strolls around the park, late-night discussions over a few beers, or perhaps just lounging in the living room while watching classic films and spending quiet moments together. Slowly but steadily, we gave ourselves over to the unspoken connection that had always been between us. One evening as we sat on the porch and watched the sun set, I became aware of how drastically everything had changed as the sky was painted in various tones of pink and orange. Before that night, when Davin came to my room and shared thoughts that neither of us completely understood at the time, we were different people. His hand was now softly resting on mine as we sat side by side. For the first time in years, I felt at ease. The pleasant stillness between us was broken by the sound. I nodded and grinned. Back then, you were a child. You had a million questions about the sky all the time. Davin grinned and gave my hand a little squeeze. I suppose my curiosity has always existed. My heart was pounding because of something in the way he said it. It made me realize how far we've come, how much we've changed, and how much more we have in common. Davin turned to face me as the sun sank, casting a gentle golden glow over everything. His face was solemn but kind. His voice was quieter now, and he added, I was thinking about us, about how this developed. I felt the same uneasiness mixed with eagerness, and my breath froze in my throat. I felt my heart pounding as he nodded and looked into my eyes. Yes, he continued, I know we said we would take it slow, and we did, but I don't want to hold back anymore. I don't want to pretend I don't know how I feel about you. Davin's remarks exposed everything, even though we had been dancing around it for weeks, allowing ourselves time to get used to the new dynamic between us. I also don't want to limit myself. My voice was a little shaky. But still complicated. Davin smiled but was filled with a hint of sadness. I know it is so, but at the same time I don't want to continue pretending that what we have between us is real and not real. I swallowed hard. My throat suddenly dried up. He was right. We couldn't keep dancing around what was between us. Feelings were real. It was undeniable, and the connection we shared was something that had been building for a long time. But saying it out loud, fully confessing it was something I hadn't done. Yet I had never felt like this before. I whispered, my voice barely audible. It wasn't like that. Davin's hand tightened around mine, his thumb gently caressing my skin. I did too, but isn't it worth it? The sincerity in his eyes, the quiet faith in his voice made my chest tighten. I couldn't deny my feelings anymore. I wanted this. I wanted him in a way that transcended everything, and for the first time I felt ready to stop fighting it. Yes, I said softly, my heart pounding in my chest. Davin smiled, his eyes relieved, and before I could say anything else he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine, a kiss filled with everything we hadn't said out loud yet, his hand cupping my face, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, letting the weight of the moment wash over me. There was no hesitation this time, no second guessing. The kiss deepened, and I felt his arms wrapping around me. The outside world seemed lost, his body against mine, his lips against mine. It was overwhelming, but finally in the best way possible. Davin rested his forehead against mine, his hand still gently caressing my face. I love you, he whispered, the words spilling from my mouth so easily and naturally that I barely had time to process them before they hit me like a tidal wave. My heart raced, and I felt an explosion of emotion rising within me. One of us had said it out loud for the first time, but I knew it was so. I sank into him as his palm cradled my face and drew me in, allowing the gravity of the situation to overwhelm me. This time, there was no second guessing, no hesitation. The outer world faded away as the kiss grew deeper, and I felt his arms encircle me. It was overpowering, but in the greatest manner conceivable, to feel his body against mine and his lips moving against mine. With his hand still softly stroking my cheek, Davin leaned his forehead against mine. He mumbled, I love you, and I blurted out the words so spontaneously and effortlessly that I hardly had time to comprehend them before they swept over me like a tidal wave. My heart pounded, and I experienced a flood of emotion. I knew that was true, but it had been the first time one of us had spoken it aloud. In actuality, I had known it for some time, even if I was unable to embrace it completely inside myself. However, everything seemed even more genuine after hearing those words come from his mouth. I said, I love you too, my voice shaking under the intensity of the statement. Warmth radiated from Davin's smile as he gave me another, gentler, softer kiss, as though relishing the moment. I gave him a kiss in return, feeling the truth of those words sink into my chest and ground me as nothing else had. In actuality, I had known it for some time, even if I couldn't believe it completely myself, but hearing those words come from his mouth made everything seem much more genuine. I love you, I said in a whisper, my voice shaking under the words' weight. Warmth radiated from Davin's smile as he gave me another, gentler kiss, this time more gently, as though he was relishing the moment. I returned his kiss as I realized how true those comments were. Nothing else ever grounded me as the words did when they landed in my chest. The days that followed were like waking from a dream. Since we had finally spoken what we had been holding within for so long, everything seemed lighter now. We were free to stop second-guessing ourselves and dancing around our emotions. We were discussing everything and nothing while seated in the meadows or by the lake. There were moments when we didn't need to converse at all. Our relationship was stronger than words could express. Davin cuddled up to me, resting his head on my breast as we lay in bed one evening. Unaware of what was ahead and how we would handle the intricacies of our relationship, I found myself contemplating the future. But my fear had subsided. I was confident that we would confront whatever came next. Davin's hand moved up my chest and rested there as he stirred a little. A surge of affection washed over me as I gazed at him. Even though his eyes were half closed, he had a calmness about him that I had never noticed before. "I don't want this to ever end," he said in a quiet but passionate murmur. "It won't," I said in a firm, confident tone. "We'll make it." Davin grinned and closed his eyes as he approached me, and I had a sense of peace descend upon me. It didn't matter if the outside world might not comprehend what we had. The fact that we had discovered something genuine and valuable was what counted. And I knew in my heart that we would overcome whatever obstacles that were in our way.